Valentine's Day, that magical time of year when Cupid dusts off his bow, polishes his arrows, and sends out his message of love. Picture a day when the world suddenly transforms into a sea of red and pink, and where the White House shares their love of the holiday too, with social media posts like this one that reads, "Roses are red, violets are blue, come here illegally, and we'll deport you." The post concludes with a Happy Valentine's greeting.
Boy, that escalated quickly. I mean, that really got out of hand fast.
While the White House trolls their haters online, California and New York have already begun shifting towards Donald Trump's agenda. They are doing this because the long arm of the Justice Department has begun suing state after state. Pam Bondi is not screwing around.
President Trump has directed this to stop. And if you don't comply with federal law, we will hold you accountable. We did it to Illinois. Strike one. Strike two is New York. And if you are a state not complying with federal law, you're next. Get ready.
Now, California Governor Gavin Newsom has heard the message that Pam Bondi was putting down. And so the good governor of California is now announcing his intention to veto Assembly Bill 15. It is a proposed legislation that would prohibit the state's prison system from cooperating with ICE Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE. The bill, sponsored by Democratic Assembly member Mike Gibson, aims to prevent California's Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation from sharing information or assisting with the transfer of eligible individuals or people to ICE for immigration detention and deportation purposes. Something that most assuredly would have gotten the state sued. I mean, California is likely going to get sued anyway for a lot of their weird immigration laws, but why add fuel to the fire? Am I right, Governor? Meanwhile, in New York, Mayor Eric Adams has announced plans to allow ICE agents to operate on Rikers Island, which is reversing a policy that has been in place since 2014. This decision came after a meeting with President Trump's border czar, Tom Homan, where they discussed ways to remove violent migrant gangs from the city. Now, Adams' new stance will include preparing an executive order to allow ICE presence at Rikers Island. He will also allow ICE agents to assist the Correctional Intelligence Bureau with criminal investigations. And they are discussing the possibility of embedding more NYPD detectives into federal task forces focusing on violent gangs and criminal activity. Now, this is an article from the New York Post where they title it, "Adams Puts His Foot in His Mouth, Claims He Wants to Cooperate with ICE on Civil Enforcement, and is quickly forced to walk it back." Let's see what they're talking about here.
ICE is running in our schools, ICE is running in our churches, and they are creating this frenzy. They're not in the business of just grabbing children. And we need to, just stop all this noise. Rikers Island, particularly after all the reforms, Rikers Island is now having some of the most dangerous people in our city. And by having ICE on Rikers Island, part of our gang intelligence, using our intel with NYPD, correction officers, we could identify those gangs inside and outside on the street. There was no reason they were removed from Rikers Island. And as I sat down with Tom earlier, I said that we're going to look at all the legalese. I'm able to do an executive order to put them back on Rikers Island, what they should be with part of our criminal justice apparatus. I asked the city council to do change the bill that was already in place and modify it that if you are committing a crime, that we should be able to collaborate with ICE, even on civil enforcement, if you have committed a crime. That part of the bill is wrong.
I think sanctuaries are sanctuary criminals, but we walked out of the meeting yesterday, and getting back on Rikers Island is a game changer. We can get, not only we get the bad guys before they hit the street, the intelligence of how the TDA operates, where they're operating, all this intelligence they gather at Rikers Island, we'll have access to. But no, I'm strictly against sanctuary city status just because I think sanctuaries are for criminals.
Now, the New York Post goes on to write, soon after making the remarks, the mayor backtracked, telling the Post there seems to be a misunderstanding. He said, "Let me be very clear. I am not opening the door to civil immigration enforcement with the federal government. I believe the federal government should pursue dangerous criminals, including undocumented individuals, meaning illegal aliens, as our city's local laws have long stated, only through criminal enforcement actions. Our laws can be strengthened," he went on to say. "However, to more effectively go after those who are dangerous criminals who are here illegally. To not have the honest conversation would be irresponsible." Now, City Hall refused to elaborate when asked what exact changes Adams was calling for after he misspoke. The NYPD quickly insisted that it does not engage in civil immigration enforcement, period. The NYPD does not engage in criminal enforcement matters, as it always has, regardless of a person's immigration status, including work on a federal criminal task forces. Now, this statement comes after Adams and Homan held a closed-door meeting on Thursday at the city ICE's headquarters in Lower Manhattan, during which Adams promised to reopen the shuttered ICE office at Rikers Island. Now, the pair have refused to go into further details about what else was discussed during their hour-and-a-half sit-down. Homan, though, vowed to be up his butt until Adams follows through with what they agreed on. He said, "If it doesn't come through, I'll be back in New York City, and we won't be sitting on the couch. I'll be in his office," up his butt, saying, "Where the hell is the agreement we came to?" Now, the future for sanctuary states will likely get ever more difficult in the coming weeks and months ahead. With Pam Bondi's Department of Justice lawsuits against several states with sanctuary policies, including New York, already underway, the rest will likely be watching with great interest on how the legal battle unfolds here. And if the Department of Justice prevails in these lawsuits, this will likely ramp up further federal action against sanctuary jurisdictions and will potentially lead to additional lawsuits and financial penalties and more for non-compliant states. And undoubtedly, with enough pressure, a lot of the sanctuary states will back off and get out of the way. And the left, who remains staunchly in the position of keeping as many of these illegal aliens, their semi-slaves, in the country as they can, argue that the illegals are working the work that Americans just don't want to do. Why, they're doing it at wages that Americans wouldn't take, and that's why it's okay. We pay them less than regular humans that are American citizens. It's okay. Never mind that they're creating a permanent underclass. We need these less thans. We need our semi-slaves to fold our laundry, to babysit our kids, and work the jobs that we just don't like to do. That seems to be the standard MO for the left. It's either that or it's racism, or Hitler. For example, there's a bill that's passed the House of Representatives. It's called H.R. 35, the Agent Raul Gonzalez Officer Safety Act. This bill makes it a federal offense to evade or flee from a U.S. Border Patrol agent or law enforcement officer assisting the Border Patrol. Essentially, it would impose penalties for those who commit this offense. And people who break this law could get up to 2 years in prison. This law would apply to people operating a motor vehicle within 100 miles of the U.S. border while intentionally fleeing from pursuing agents. But naturally, Democrats don't like this law. Well, why would they? And Representative Janelle Bynum, well, she wants you to equate this law with fugitives fleeing slavery from Democrat-run states, mind you, to Republican safe zones. You know, remember the pre-Civil War, all that good stuff? Listen to this.
I urge my colleagues to oppose H.R. 35. Let's call this bill what it is. Fear-mongering dressed up as officer safety. This bill echoes one of the darkest chapters in our nation's history.
Does it, though?
The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850.
Uh-oh.
Just like that shameful law, H.R. 35 forces local authorities and encourages the deputizing of randos to do the federal government's work, punishing them if they refuse. Back then, it was hunting down people who dared to seek freedom. Today, it's forcing local police to become federal enforcers.
I mean, they just can't seem to help themselves. The left only seems to know how to use emotional blackmail as their primary tool to get their way. It worked for decades. They could just accuse of Republicans of racism, and oh my gosh, they're going to turn around and say, oh, no, please, whatever, we'll do whatever. Just don't accuse us of that. Same thing with sexism and everything else. The problem is for the Democrat Party is that this emotional blackmail is starting not to work anymore, especially in the era of Trump. And because of this, the Trump train is just continuing to plow on, wiping through the opposition like they aren't even there.